All right. Good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining. I see that pretty much everyone is here. There's probably some people that are going to join a little bit late, but we have a lot of things to go through. So we're going to start this latest CSIS webinar. Our theme today is cyber threat predictions for 2021. As you know, 2020, the current year, is winding up. It's probably time to look at how some of the things in the cyber threat landscape evolved during this year and try to understand what we should expect for the next year. I hope everyone can hear me well. I just want to give you a heads up that at the end of the session, there might be some time for questions and answers. So there's a button in the lower side of the screen that says Q&A, and I advise you to push your questions there. So not in the group chat or anything else, just the Q&A. To jump right in, this is the agenda. We're going to talk about things like the evolution of botnets, where the financial threats are going, what changes we're seeing in the way that nation states are approaching cybersecurity, and a couple of ideas about OT and IoT security. Then we're going to wind it up with some final thoughts. So to jump right in, a couple of words about your hosts, CSIS. We are a Copenhagen-based cybersecurity company founded in 2003. We have more than 70 employees from various nationalities, and we are a 100% private company and employee-owned. We are the proud hosts of the famous Copenhagen Cybercrime Conference. This year it was held online, but our hopes are up that next year we're going to restart doing the physical events that made this conference so famous. And lately we are proud to be credited by the Gartner Group for our actionable and world-known threat intelligence, and actually for a couple of our products in the anti-fraud space. About myself, my name is Stefan. I'm a security researcher and a threat hunter based in Bucharest, Romania. I was recently named the Internet Doctor by Forbes for my activities with car hacking and APT research. And I've joined the CSIS Security Group as a cyber intelligence expert with more than 13 years of experience. And I encourage you to follow me on Twitter. Throughout my career, I have the opportunity to see the threat landscape always changing. And if we look past, and this is actually from the days when I was still a little kid and I wasn't involved in the security industry, if you look into the past, the days of the proof of concept viruses were actually very interesting, because back then viruses didn't have the monetization component that they have now, so they didn't try to make any money from these operations. But as soon as all of us connected to the internet, and as soon as we started doing our business on the internet, and as soon as we started transferring money by using internet and computers, of course the value came there. And nowadays there's plenty of adversaries that we have to take into account when devising our cybersecurity strategy, because their motivations are completely different, and of course their tools, their techniques, and their procedures might differ. So of course most of our focus is on cybercrime. It's cyber criminals that are in this business for the money. But lately there's also hacktivists interested in data leaks or exposure of certain political messages. There's of course APTs, basically nation state sponsored threat actors that are interested in espionage and disruption and fake news, and generally in cyber warfare. And last but not least, of course, cyber terrorists who might cause havoc in our societies. The interesting thing is that the lines between all these groups are starting to slowly fade away. So, for example, right now we can see APT groups that are engaging in money-making cybercrime activities, or cyber criminals that might adopt tactics belonging to APT groups. And we're going to talk about this a little bit later in the presentation. But the main idea here is that malware keeps evolving, the threat landscape keeps evolving, and this evolution is seen quite clearly when you look at the numbers of new malware samples that are analyzed by the security industry each day. If we go back to the 90s, there would be a situation in which one new virus would appear every hour. In the 2000s, we have one new virus appearing every minute, just to show you the exponential growth of this threat. 2010, we moved to one new virus every second, which roughly means 100,000 new malicious software samples every day. And the numbers that we're looking at right now, it's almost 500,000 of malicious samples every day. This is the average. Of course, there's days with more than that, and some days with less. But these are quite staggering numbers, and it shows that cybercrime is definitely a profitable business, and it's a business in which cyber criminals are investing more time and more resources. Another way of looking at how the threat landscape is evolving is to see exactly what malware strains are more active in one era or another. And what we do at CSIS is we keep updated this malware timeline. We publish it in the threat matrix reports, and I'm going to show you at the end of the presentation how to get your hands on these reports that we're publishing. And I just wanted to show it to you just to take a glimpse at it and to emphasize the fact that 2020 was the first year in which we added an important event to our malware timeline, an event that is not necessarily malware directed, but it's an event that shaped the world that we live in, and at least at the current moment, and this is the coronavirus pandemic that I'm talking about. This was the main thing that happened in 2020, and if we look back at how 2020 developed, there's definitely been an impact from the COVID-19 pandemic with increased global tensions in terms of economics and politics. But at the same time, when it comes to our work, when it comes to the digital world, we've seen a world which is going to hyper digitalization very quickly, with remote working being the norm all of a sudden from one day to another, and this has translated in an increased attack surface especially for organizations that weren't ready to support this work from home kind of situation. At the same time, there's growing worries of an economic recession coming up next year. And according to a recent McKinsey study, a staggering 70% of CISOs that were interviewed, they believe that their budgets for the next year will essentially shrink, even if they ask for an increase. So there's very few industry verticals in which they are pretty sure that the budgets are going to increase. So we're right now in a situation in which malware and attacks generally are evolving exponentially, while the resources of the defenders are, of course, like usual, like always, limited. So that's why it's even more important for us to understand the threats that we're facing so that we can prioritize our strategy. So let's move to the predictions. We have around 10 top things that I wanted to talk about. So let's jump right in and start talking about botnets a little bit. The first thing that I think is going to happen next year is that living off the land kind of strategies and the employment of open source tools is going to become more prevalent throughout the malware ecosystem. We're already seeing some cybercrime operations trying to decrease their reliance on custom tools, because custom tools can easily be tracked and can easily be attributed to one specific group. And of course, they can also be detected. So one strategy that the attackers are going about is that to abuse tools that already exist on their target system, on the victim machine. And I'm talking here about things like PowerShell, which are now the norm on most Windows installations, but also to use and to abuse open source components, whether these open source components are designed for offensive capabilities, or they might just be open source software that is used for legit purposes like administrating computers. These are all abused by attackers for achieving their gain. So I'm not talking here about living off the land, as some people want to isolate themselves from the society right now, but living off the land in terms of abusing things that are already already on the system. And another trend that we're seeing is that tools which weren't necessarily open source, we call them leaked source, tools like Cobalt Strike, are starting to be employed by cyber criminals, which are less and less sophisticated because of the availability of the source code for these tools. Another thing that we see is happening and will continue to happen next year is a real shift in the way that bot masters, the masters of various botnets, are trying to monetize and to gain a financial advantage from their botnets. Because of the current situation of the infection lifespans that are getting shorter, in some cases, Microsoft Defender might pick up signatures for specific malware samples in days, even in a couple of hours. There's a current race in the botnet world of how to make money from a computer as quickly as possible, in a matter of days, if possible. So we're seeing cyber criminals better profiling their victims, and they're going to get better at this in the future. And also, we're going to see an increase in the reselling activity of accesses that cyber criminals already have to machines. So there's this cybercrime as a service trend that's going on, and essentially, if one cyber criminal is doubtful that they can make a significant amount of money from a specific infection, they will essentially resell that infection to more sophisticated groups, which can, for example, launch a perfect strike with ransomware. So speaking about ransomware, we're seeing more botnets that are switching focus to launching ransomware attacks, and this is probably going to be the main thing happening in 2020. And by the way, I have to mention this: most of the things that we're talking here today are based on our experience with doing research and with doing incident response. And essentially, we don't have a crystal ball, we don't have a way to know the future, but based on what we're seeing happening during this year, we picked up on some of the things that we think are going to be relevant next year. So coming back to ransomware, the attacks are going to be targeted with much higher precision. We're going to see more actors jumping on this game of exfiltrating data before encrypting it, because what we're seeing nowadays is that hack and extort kind of operations are on the rise. So attackers are trying to threaten the victims that their information is going to become public. Attackers are going to try to publicly shame the victim and generally apply pressure, as much pressure as possible, to make sure that the ransom is paid. So this pressure can come in the forms of leaking sensitive data publicly, and we've even seen pressure being applied in the form of a DDoS attack that is being launched at the same time with the ransomware attack, essentially diverting attention of the security team and making it harder for the victim to allocate resources in dealing with this attacks. And of course, there's also interesting developments coming from the Office for Foreign Assets Control, the U.S. Treasury, basically, that issued some guidance for ransom payments during this year. And these guidances are probably going to make it harder for incident responders to negotiate and to deal with some ransomware cases, because what they essentially say is that payments towards ransomware groups might be considered as something that would breach the financial sanctions, because some of these groups, they are based in countries that are under financial sanctions. And while everybody always advises victims of ransomware not to pay the ransom, we all know of public cases in which companies had to pay the ransom because this was their only way of moving forward with the business. They essentially had to choose between paying the ransom and going bankrupt. So we're going to see a lot of new innovations coming from this ransomware area. And I think the main thing is going to be that we're going to see more ransom data leaks. If you look at the data for the past 6 months, we started inside CSIS, we started tracking all of these public data leaks that ransomware groups are responsible for. And you can see a massive increase both in the numbers of leaks and in the number of threat actors that are engaging in this kind of activity. And it seems that this kind of approach offers the attackers a greater chance that the ransom is going to be paid by the victim. So essentially, there's no reason why this trend will not increase during the next year. In terms of C2 infrastructure, the events that happened in the past couple of months with the takedown efforts that involved various parties going against malware infrastructure such as TrickBot are essentially pushing cyber criminals to evolve at a much rapid pace than usual. Of course, CNC infrastructure is always evolving, but right now we're seeing cybercrime groups going for tactics that can offer them resilience in case of attempted takedown efforts. And this resilience usually comes from adding multiple layers of command and control proxies. So the victim machine will never connect to the, let's say, mothership of the malware operation. And at the same time, we're seeing an emergence in the use of peer-to-peer and distributed technologies for command and control infrastructure. And we've seen this, probably the biggest example is with TrickBot's Bazaar Loader and their adoption of MRDNS, which is a distributed blockchain-based DNS system. So essentially, we're going to see more of a shift from centralized infrastructure to P2P and distributed technologies, which are much harder, even impossible to take down. And another thing that we're seeing on the increase and will continue throughout next year is the abusing of legit infrastructure by malware operators. I'm talking here about, big platforms or websites or applications such as Dropbox or GitHub, which are abused either to host malware and to distribute malware from IPs and domain names that are essentially whitelisted by many security vendors, or at the same time using these applications to provide command and control infrastructure or to host exfiltrated data. In all cases, communications to these IPs essentially are much harder to flag when looking at the network traffic because of the simple fact that there's a lot of legit use going on, and encryption is usually enabled. So it's pretty hard to differentiate a malware communicating with Dropbox, such as the recent Turla campaigns that were uncovered, or an actual user that is using his Dropbox account. When looking at the threats that are affecting the financial sector directly, one of the things that we're following very closely at CSIS is the evolution of web skimming and essentially mage card type of attacks. And what's going to happen next year is that we're going to see web skimming having a much larger impact and more significant impact on the on the payments processing industry. What we're seeing right now is an exponential growth year on year in the number of threat actors that are engaging in mage card kind of activities. We've already seen overlaps and turf fights happening between these various actors. And what's going to happen next year is that new and sophisticated groups will start adopting mage card tactics. We've already seen APT groups such as Lazarus, based in North Korea, experimenting with mage card kind of attacks, going after e-commerce websites. And usually these more sophisticated groups, whenever they start a new endeavor, they also bring innovation and bigger budgets here. So we're thinking that in the future, these actors might leverage things like ODays, vulnerabilities for which there's no available patch, to attempt to get their hands on the cards directly on the server side. At the same time, they're going to score their already infected computers, the list of bots, for credentials that might give them access to places in which they might be able to modify e-commerce websites in such a way that mage card code will be run on the client's computer. And another thing that is going to make mage card investigations harder is that C2 infrastructure of mage card operations is also evolving, and we're going to see as a standard the dedicated use for C2 servers for each victim. So essentially, rather than having one C2 server that is embedded in multiple infected web shops, the attackers will generate a new and unique C2 server for each infected victim. This will make it harder for researchers to pivot between one victim and another, to make these operations harder to track, and at the end of the day, it will make them more resilient in the face of the takedown efforts and other methods of keeping this fraud to an acceptable level. Another significant financial threat that we at CSIS are tracking quite closely is phishing. And what's happening right now is that phishing is going real time, and we think that this is going to be the main factor describing the phishing space in the near future. Real-time phishing, historically speaking, has been something available only in the realm of the advanced, sophisticated threat actors. But with the recent emergence of quite famous open source frameworks for doing real-time phishing and essentially bypassing two-factor authentication, these capabilities are now available to essentially any cyber criminal out there. They can use these open source frameworks, things like RealPhish or Modlishka, that have been initially developed as man-in-the-middle proxies for red teams to perform various pen testing operations. We're seeing these kind of things being abused and being or cyber criminals inspiring themselves from the R&D happening in that space to also develop custom real-time phish kits. And I'm talking here about things like Crypto or the EU admin phish kits that are enabling essentially even less sophisticated cyber criminals to phish for targets, whether on the PC or on mobile devices, and to easily bypass two-factor authentication in real time. So rather than stealing the credentials for a later use, they are abusing the victim's credentials while the victim is browsing the target website. And of course, we're going to see more focus on alternative initial infection vectors, which is basically an uptick in the abuse of search engine ads, whether it is on Google or Bing or your favorite search engine. One very important player in the threat landscape nowadays, type of player actually, is the nation state player, because there's more and more APT activity happening. And what we're seeing is that APT and cybercrime are currently merging. This is not something that will happen overnight, so it's not something that will happen tomorrow, but it's something that is slowly happening. And as I mentioned in the beginning of the presentation, we're already seeing APT groups that are adopting cybercrime tactics, whether it is about using and abusing crime as a service kind of platforms to resell or buy access to various victim machines, or even to monetize their already existing infections with the purpose of making a financial gain rather than the purpose of doing cyber espionage. And this is specifically true for APT groups that are coming from countries which are under financial sanctions. So it seems that there's an affinity that they have for going after the financial sector and trying to monetize their cyber capabilities. At the same time, we're seeing advanced and experienced cyber criminal groups who are learning from APTs and adopting APT behavior, whether it is very good reconnaissance that they're doing, whether it is increased lateral movement capabilities that can lead to a very precise final strike, or again, reselling access to these victim machines if they don't have the opportunity to launch the perfect attack. We're seeing groups such as TrickBot collaborating with APT groups such as Lazarus in areas like this. And I think it's a very interesting development because cyber criminals will always jump on every opportunity to use the access that they already have and to monetize it. And for APTs, this is a good opportunity to get access to machines where otherwise they might not have access. At the same time, there's a big problem, especially with countries that turn a blind eye to cybercrime. So in many cases, we can call it state-sponsored cybercrime, which is usually when the country itself turns a blind eye to cybercrime that is not affecting its citizens. And at the same time, we're seeing new and, let's say, non-standard APT players that have different rules of engagement from what we're used with. And that's something that was going to massively change the game in the future. Also about nation states, what is going to happen in the near future is that the current cyber power grab is going to only get bigger. Right now, there's an actual race in cyberspace for nation states to increase their capabilities. And this has been happening ever since the cyberspace has become the 5th official domain for war. So essentially, until now, we had land, we had water, we had air, and we had space. And now it's also cyberspace that the states are officially interested in. And this translates into increased data collection and digital surveillance, whether it is a trend started by not started, but increased by the COVID developments and contact tracing kind of apps and discussions, or whether it is the private mobile tracking industry that is reselling this data to other players, including nation-state players. The phone tracking and generally user tracking industry is definitely booming around the world. When talking about dealing with attacks, we're going to see an increase in nation states' use of, let's say, non-technical methods for dealing with attacks. And I'm talking here about indicting criminals, arresting criminals, or in the cases where this is not possible, at least placing financial sanctions on the criminals or on the umbrella organizations that are facilitating the cyber crimes. In cases in which this is not possible, nation states will have to resort to doxing threat actors. And we've already seen a couple of players doing this throughout the past year. Whenever you cannot arrest an APT actor, it's at least maybe a good idea to dox him because that can impact the way that the operations are going. And at the same time, we're seeing more countries interested in what is called persistent engagement, where they're trying to develop either hybrid or offensive capabilities in which they can launch hackback kind of attacks whenever the country is targeted. So essentially, we're going to see an increase of the nation-state level power grab on the cyber domain in the near future. Last but not least, operational networks and IoT security. I think this is a very important topic that we need to look at. And some of the things that happened lately and that will shape the future are the fact that Microsoft has ended support for Windows 7 and for Windows Server 2008. And the systems are still popular in ICS kind of environments, but also in financial environments. And also what happened lately was the leak of the source code of Windows XP, which again, it's still common on OT networks, especially during the in the air-gapped networks where well, it's not considered, unfortunately, a big security risk. This means that exploits are going to develop, exploits are going to appear, and we need to update our software and we need to update our hardware in order to run the new and more modern and supported software. We're going to see an increase in the use of O-Day exploits, and this is mainly because of the let's call them R&D budgets that are at the disposal of successful cyber criminals. These budgets have massively increased during the past years because of very successful and big ransomware kind of operations. So right now, acquiring a zero-day exploit is not something that a cyber criminal cannot afford. And at the same time, we're going to see more traditional IT criminals exploring OT opportunities. So the thing that I want you to remember here is that OT attacks will always come from the IT area. And this is mainly because of the fact that attackers are doing more research on the machines that they already infected. They're trying to understand what the opportunity is there, and they might resell this OT access that they have and that they cannot monetize to other groups that have the experience and the willingness to do that. And probably the last thing that I wanted to mention today is that non-Windows malware will become more common. We're seeing attacks against devices that aren't necessarily, laptops, desktops, or servers. Devices such as phones, routers, smart TVs, essentially anything that is nowadays called smart. We're seeing an evolution of attacks going after mobile phones, and Android is becoming a main target for cybercrime, while iOS is constantly losing its, let's say, aura of security. And last but not least, Linux machines. Attacks on these Linux machines will, of course, increase. And unfortunately, we need to stop thinking that Linux cannot be targeted, because we're already seeing both cybercrime and APT groups such as TrickBot or Turla actively developing and maintaining frameworks for infecting and maintaining persistence on Linux machines. And that's an area where we as defenders were lacking visibility many times, we're lacking telemetry, and we're lacking defensive tools, and we're also fighting this traditional false sense of security on Linux machines. As a couple of final thoughts, what I want you to encourage is to make sure to always keep in touch with our threat matrix reports. This is a must-read publication coming from CSIS experts. We publish it every 6 months, and it's packed with facts and stats that are always describing the continuously changing threat landscape. We reflect on the latest trends. We talk about real case scenarios, and we share lessons learned from our incident response and research activities. All of these reports plus other interesting things, you can find them by either following us on social media on networks such as LinkedIn or Twitter or whatever you prefer. And also you can access all of these reports and also the webinars, including the recording of the current webinar, in our engagement hub, which you can access on csisgroup.com, our main website. With this in mind, I'd like to thank you so much for paying attention. Make sure to follow me on Twitter and to get in touch with us in case you have any questions or worries. I'm not sure if there's any questions from anyone regarding the things that we've talked about. And I can see, okay, we have something. What is the best practice to tackle extortion threats in the first instance? How to make sure that users are not clicking too far before investigations, negotiations can start? This is actually a very good question, and probably the main thing that needs to happen when such a ransomware or extortion case is being involved is happening is the fact that you as an investigator, you have to collect evidence as quickly as possible. And this evidence needs to be collected in a format that can, first of all, help forensic investigators understand what happened there. And second of all, it needs to be collected in a format that might be later used in the legal proceeding following the case, whether these legal proceedings are GDPR related or an actual criminal complaint about the perpetrators of the attack. So in all cases, we recommend using a solution such as CIRC, the CSIS Incident Response Toolkit, which is a tool that allows investigators to collect all this data in a remote way, so without having to travel physically to the infected machine, and in a way that this data can be correlated with other cases and that it can be enriched and to help with these investigations. And of course, if possible, never pay the ransom. It's never a good idea to support these cyber criminals, and this is the advice that we will always give. A couple of messaging thanking for the update, and I'd like to thank everyone for joining us. This recording is going to be available on YouTube and on our engagement hub. And with this in mind, I'd like to thank everyone for joining and wish everyone a great Friday ahead and all the best in the coming new year. Cheers and goodbye.